Welcome. This is a December 18th OpenZFS production user call. We have Mark, Dan, Andrew, Rob, Jan, Greg, Stu, and myself, and there is a lot going on. So, as perhaps a follow-up to the recent user and developer summit, Rob, who is present, provided a present, which is a very simple, hopefully unambiguous feature that I requested, which is the notion of a zpool new name property. And what it would do is automatically rename a pool on import, which is the best time to rename a pool, and that's the standard behavior. But if you have a system in a data center, that is not necessarily a simple thing to do. So this may require some bootloader awareness. It may require handling of zpools by ID rather than name, although maybe the loaders do that already. Rob, can you tell us more about this exciting technology? Ooh, and a GitHub pull request link, and you have an ASCII video of it in action.
Yes,
Good
so
day,
it was
mate.
a hello. It was a kind of a Sunday morning prototype. It's not very hard to hook up because all it does is if it has a magical property, pool property that isn't really a property but just sets something in the label, which is like how we find pools, because obviously you need a new name before you import it. So that's where we sort of put it. Um, and then the command line, so zpool import, when it's finding information about the pool, if it sees that and you haven't provided a second argument to zpool import, it will just use that. So it goes through all the same rename channels as zpool import does. So that's why it can be such a cheesy prototype, because all it really has to do is store a value and retrieve it. So where it is likely to get interesting is so I don't basically right now you still have to do zpool import, or at least you have to call the method in libzfs that does the import. Um, but I know that there are mechanisms used by bootloaders, and I'm not sure what the FreeBSD one does exactly, where it can like offer a pre-cooked pull config and basically say import this, don't ask any questions. Um, and it's definitely not wired into that path. So mostly because I don't know it. So what I'm really looking for this to proceed, because I don't have a need for it. I appreciate the need for it, but I don't have a need for it, and I don't really have the time to go and investigate it. Is I kind of need a point person who would, pick it up, play with it, figure out what the touch points are. Like, I'll write the code, I'll figure out where things need to hook up, but I need someone to kind of think about how it should work, how they'd like it to work. Do they have to set it? Could they set, should this be stored in a pool property, or should it be a like a loader conf variable or something? Or like I don't know. I don't even That's not true in this case, Jan. Um zpool cache isn't guaranteed to exist ever, as far as ZFS internals are concerned. It's sometimes used as a source of information for um, pool construction. But yes, my point is I need someone to actually take point on this properly, rather than um, because I don't have the time or the inclination to dig into it further. But there it is. It was fun to do. I don't think it's very difficult to get across the line. If that's the kind of what you're thinking of, then yeah, we could do that.
Thank you, Rob, to begin with. And uh, one would hope it could be transparent to all supported OSs, and bootloaders will do what they do and only need gentle massaging. Relying completely on the bootloaders gets is where we're at already, and there's no such feature. Jan, it sounds like you had a comment. coming?
Yeah, as far as I know, so additional hints for additional pools to look into are stored into the file I put into the chat. Other than that, the rest is done via kernel environment variables set by the bootloader. Stuff like the current device. Yeah, that's the most important one, I think. Other than that, you have a bunch of an array of boot envs. Yeah, which is the list of boot environments. I don't know that is actually used by the kernel. I don't think so. It's probably just that the loader kind of leaks that as an environment variable um, into the kernel, which isn't harmful. Yeah.
Right. And
Other than that, we have the load def and so on. But so the bootloader knows where it's stored. It infers where to look for the pool. It finds basically the pool on the disk it's on in the next partition by using the GPT information, if I remember correctly, if there's one of them marked as active or EFI variables, and then it continues to boot. And yeah, if you break that by renaming, you can have the same problem as without it, that feature, so that you have to have a recovery boot medium, or at the very least, access to the system console to specify the root device and the form of ZFS new pool name slash root and then your boot environment. So yeah,
do do we know if zpool cache is currently storing values as names or pool IDs?
as a binary file.
It's a opaque
It's a
instruction.
it's an NV list and it stores both. It has the GUID which never changes and it has the last imported name. The pool's name is always the last name it was imported with. It gets to keep
That's
that
the
after.
question. So, based on what you know without digging in, would the pool renaming, though it has the GUID, potentially break all the things? Last imported name.
If you're referencing it by name, then then yes, we're no longer going to find it by that name after we rename the pool. But that's the problem you have right now.
Right. So
If
we're
you
where we're
if you
at, but
if you reference it by GUID, then
mhm.
sure, whatever. Also, I mean, you also need to think about like your mount points. If you're using implicit mount points, then those are going to change when the pool's name changes. So, there's things like that which we could easily detect. I mean, we could make as part of a rename operation be, oh, we actually pin down all the we pin all the mount points or something. I don't know. Um, that's and I can think of different answers to lots of these things. And that's why I kind of like someone
Yeah,
who sort of needs it or likes it to actually think about, well, how would I like this to work? What feels good? What makes it pleasant? What makes it comfortable? What makes it safe? Because
yeah.
Amen.
that's
Amen.
When it comes to that, I would like to see a pool without an implicit root file system. If there has to be a pool default data set, make it a 0 byte sized volume or something, so that you explicitly create the file systems. But that's not something you can retrofit without breaking so much code implicitly depending on that behavior and confusing new users who read the currently existing documentation. So that's not going to happen, I think.
Cool. Well, I will do my best to assist in fleshing this out. Um, we, in all practicality, have for OpenZFS, it's bootable Linux and FreeBSD, one of whom imports OpenZFS. Um, and let's see what the world thinks. And uh, yeah, if where we're currently at is, recovery media, out of band management, et cetera, et cetera. And I, for one, as a lot more of a user than a developer, am bumping into needing this, where, gee, be it in a cluster, you synchronize host names and pools, etc., and you want to keep track of all that, and then an adjustment after the fact is prior to this a stunning pain in the behind. So, any questions for Rob regarding this? Any thoughts on use cases? Any thoughts on edge cases, surprises, variations on this whole notion? You name it.
We'll need a bit of C.D scripting on FreeBSD unless OpenZFS decides to take responsibility for updating things like the zpool cache file and so on. Because if Rob is correct that this file stores both GUID and name, you can in theory import as long as either of those is available. So you would try probably by GUID first and then by name. The comment that the GUID of a pool never changes assumes that the user never runs the reguid command on
Oh,
it.
good point. Yes.
But that's a corner case.
Yes. Well, there you go. That's right. Yeah, that's the kind of question in
So
FreeBSD.
you
It's
want
technically a
to
service.
reguid. Here's a zpool command. Zpool
True, but you
reguid.
can set in, I believe in rc.conf, tell it to run the RC script to perform that.
Yeah, that's something you do on first boot from the VM media.
Exactly.
Because you don't want every virtual machine created from it to have the same GUID, because that will create a lot of heartache when you try to snapshot and send it to a centralized backup service.
Precisely. So, questions for Rob? I will continue the showering of gratitude. Thank you, Rob. You rock. That is delightful. And let's hope those edge cases, etc., and hooks aren't too painful.
I was attending to a work thing when Rob started talking about it. What was the main use case for this?
Deployed systems root on ZFS where the goal
Yep.
is a pool rename, and currently we are stuck with boot to your recovery media, be it an ISO and IPMI, import the pool with current name and new name, and
Yep.
hopefully,
I follow it. Yep.
yeah, sure. And
I
hopefully
know
there are
the
no mount
scenario.
point issues, et cetera, et cetera. So I frequently bump into that. Blame me as a administrator, but I trust others in especially clustered environments and multi-host environments, just to have some opportunity under even controlled circumstances as a carefully planned reboot with housekeeping. It saves perhaps a trip to the data center. I'll put it that way. Go ahead, Jan.
The goal is
Updated.
to save trips to the data center, and you have a controlled environment and a lab environment to test it on first. What you
Yep.
can do is you can create a memory disk with the MD driver, put a file system on that, install a FreeBSD userland, at least in it, then reroute, log into the rerouted memory disk system, and without losing power or panicking, we export the pool, re-import the pool from your system while it's running purely in memory. And then you can reroute back into your renamed pool.
Correct, but your average user probably hasn't even heard of reroute, let alone the majority of FreeBSD admins I know, let alone Linux
Yeah,
users. So
well,
yeah,
you
that's
could
hence the goal
you
of
could
elegant two-step process.
and
Anyway,
if you wanted to automate it further, you could basically use /rescue as the primary content of your file system. It wouldn't have to be a full userland. In theory, you could basically run the rename as your init, just a shell script as PID1, run it to completion,
okay.
and then reroute again. But Yeah,
Question from
automating that is
yes. So that's kind of where we're at, basically. Question from Dan to Rob. Was this more complex or easier than you expected on that amazing Sunday morning with hopefully some really good coffee?
It
From a
was
ZFS mug. Hold on. Stay right there.
uh-oh.
Hopefully that Sunday morning it featured one of these.
It did, but it's over on the sink right now, so
Okay,
I
cool.
can't hold it up in solidarity. I'm sorry.
No worries.
Um, uh, yeah, trying to remember how I should be so literal. It's harder than the naive property because it looks like a pool property, but it's not.
Oh, interesting.
So um, it was a little harder in that those get wired up differently, and there isn't any actual infrastructure for them. So there's just a bunch of copy and pasting. Um, things fields like compatibility and name and I forget a couple of other string ones that aren't stored as real properties because they are pre-import. But once I sort of figured out all the touch points, it wasn't too much of an issue. The other tricky bit is making sure that it will do the right thing for older versions of the if you have mismatched kernel and user space versions of uh, ZFS and ZPOL tools because one will now be asking for things that the other has no idea what's going on. So, but I've done that before in another feature, and it's usually not too bad. You just need to have a kind of signals that is sort of a handshake kind of agreement. So is it easier than I thought it might be? It wasn't as easy as I might have liked it to be, but I'd done enough of it before that it was okay. It
Did you
could be
learn
made a
anything in the
lot
process?
easier.
Could have been easier.
Yeah, yeah, that we have no internal facilities to help with setting pre-import metadata. It's all just open coded. Um, which is now on my list is like, well, we should fix that one day. But also like we have no particular documentation on um uh the like the label format. Um uh, and what older implementations will do with it. Also, it may be a library API break, depending on how I do it. In a prototype, I didn't care, but it's like, it makes it that other programs linked against libzfs would no longer link if I did it in the most obvious way. So there's crap like that. Um,
Cool,
stuff's
cool.
all hack jobby. So yeah, we could do a lot better
um,
internally in the code, but I don't think
Rob.
it adds any new complexity because it's already um we already have to do some of those things for some other stuff.
Cool. Jan, what you got?
Could you make it available as a ZFS channel program API and implicitly run a channel program to hide the ABI change by just running a function which is new?
Um, Not really. Channel programs are so much after happen so much further in than pull
Yeah,
import.
yeah, that point.
It's not a bad thought. Um, but yeah, if I didn't want to take the API change, what I'd probably do is uh well no, there's two ways to do it. I can either smuggle the values I need through a couple of other channels, which suck a little bit. But the thing we've done when upgrading an API is we've added a function name underscore v2, which is the same one but has like some extra flags or whatever at the end, and then we provide the old function as like the new one with flag 0. We've done that before, so that's if it became if we fully weaponize this, it would be we'd do something like that. It won't end up being a big issue. It's just that we don't really have much proper policy or recommendations of how to do that stuff. So you just end up making some decisions, and then it's up to how much you want to push for your way to be the blessed way, which is the kind of stupid conversations I like having. So all my ways that end up being the best ways or the only
So,
ways.
what
As
other?
long as it
Go ahead.
as long as it doesn't become worse than the rate system call family.
Well,
So,
it doesn't the first time. No, no, I take your
Exactly.
point.
Okay. What other pre-import properties could use better handling or an official mechanism for tinkering with them? You said that, hey, it's kind of uncharted, mildly uncharted territory. My term,
Let
not
me
yours.
yeah, let me have a quick look. I think I was just kind of surprised where a couple of things were stored.
Hmm.
Uh, d- d- yeah, the compatibility name. Um, sorry, so the compatibility property.
Okay.
Um, I don't have
It's almost a
my.
pseudo property.
It is. Um,
Interesting.
sorry, I don't have my code properly in front of me. The comment. So there's
Oh,
the comment property. Is stored in the label. Um, there is this old notion of a temporary name, which I only found the other day, which is not it's a little bit like this thing, except it's not stored, except it something about it is stored. I don't understand it very well. What else have we
What?
got?
temporary name. Interesting.
Yeah,
The property
that
the
import
property
time.
is the property is called tname.
Hmm.
You'll
Okay.
have to hunt. It's not documented. You'll have to hunt back through the history to find out what it does. I only saw it yesterday.
Hmm.
Um, what else? Pull GUID, pull state, obviously pull version,
Um,
errata that's set on the pool, the host ID, um, stuff like that. It's not like the code is completely chaotic.
Hmm.
It's just not. It's just not well structured.
Did you?
Like for properties, it's like you add this, and this, and you get a new property. And you don't have to think about anything else. I mean,
would
but
it
maybe these should be complicated. Maybe we don't want people just to be shoving in label extensions all day long. So,
Did you say
would it make
errata? Then go ahead, Jan.
yeah, dear
would it
Artifact.
make sense
That's a
to
feeling. No kidding. Okay.
have similar to an outroot property, an import override, so that it becomes a temporary property which you can then write back, so that you don't really change the runtime pool name, but at import you free a kernel environment variable or whatever, you kind of re, pre-record an additional import argument that you want an all pool name for this import, and then you once you have the pool imported, you can write it back
I mean,
like
I
commit
mean,
pool name,
maybe
whatever.
the thing is that that starts to require work from the client, whether it's like the bootloader or like boot environments or whatever. And those can already do that. Like anything calling whatever it's called, zpool import props, I think is the libzfs function, can already set a new name.
At import.
Um, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
The standard library function can already set a new pool name. It's one of the args. It's called zpool import props is the name of the
Underscores
function.
or altogether or what like that?
Underscores.
Okay.
Um, So if there's other client software out there that's already doing that, then like they could just be wired up that way. But then it becomes not a like generic ZFS feature. Um, I mean, maybe it shouldn't be. I mean, maybe it does belong to the bootloader. I was
Yep.
thinking about what would you do on Linux if you're using like ZFS boot menu, which is sort of the state of the art for it. And I'm like, in that you wouldn't because you have all of ZFS uh in a UEFI stub. You would just drop to its menu, export the pool, re-import it with a different name, and then say boot, and it would go. Um, so maybe this doesn't even belong in the pool in ZFS proper. Maybe this really is an external feature. I don't know. Um, But on the other
Sounds a
hand,
lot.
if we could do it internally, maybe it would be nice that I still have aspirations that we will have ZFS on, half a dozen different platforms. It would
But
be, and a lot of my what?
Go ahead, Jan.
it sounds like the functionality to rename the pool is already there, and the
Yep.
problem is getting the arguments to the import call side at boot time.
Yep.
Hmm.
Now
So
I don't know if anything else is using it though. I don't know what else uses that function. I'm just searching the
Sure.
FreeBSD code base and it does not.
so and if
Um,
you have a bootloader like FreeBSD does, which has a read-only dump down CFS implementation,
mm,
it could, I assume, read the pool without truly importing it because it just reads through the pool. And then it could read the uh, pool property free, or org.freebsd colon new name or whatever,
Hmm.
and pass that as a kernel environment variable, and then the kernel could pick it up and do the import. That would, of course, be on the
yeah.
platform specific side of things.
Well, so it sounds like a bootloader can either respect this or it can do its own acrobatics and the user looks at the bootloader and its properties. So having this institutionalized, I think, is a lovely, lovely thing. I hope I'm not entirely alone in that. And thank you, Rob. Um, uh, maybe as from yesterday's call, Titter, take it to the review. Go, let's go hit that GitHub page I've linked at the top there and provide our thoughts. Again, any final questions for Rob regarding that? I just want to keep saying thank you, thank you, thank you. And we do have a few wonderful segue opportunities to the next little topic, if that's okay, Rob, if you have a few more minutes.
Yeah, sure. I've got about
Cool.
20 before I have to go off for my next meeting. So
Awesome. Well, on this note from earlier today on the Enterprise Working Group call, thank you, Jan, for bringing this up. There was a discussion of how to have the collision of Samba and ZFS to institutionally support volume shadow copies, and it sounds like there were libzfs issues where FreeNAS is pulling against their own lockdown sort of combination of OS version and ZFS version and all the things. I did reach out to Andrew Walker on this, who is mentioned here, and I have not heard back. That was only a few hours ago. And so, as you may recall from the summit, there was a session dedicated to what libzfs API guarantees we can make. And do the two of these topics, the new name property and the issue at hand here with Samba, play in and give us a nudge ahead on a more formal API, which is above my pay grade on what needs to be done, but I am okay at acknowledging the existence of issues.
So I looked over that
Yes.
issue, and the issue is that we have both libzfs, which is internal to the ZFS version you're running, and libzfs underscore sorry, libzfs underscore core, which is
Yeah,
supposed to
you
be the
commented.
stable, portable API, but FreeBSD does not include the required headers included from the libzfs underscore core.h file. So it installed the library header, but those in turn try to include files which are not installed. So you have to add the OpenZFS kernel sources in your previously based source code repository somewhere in the kernel contrib directory to your compiler search path to build against it. And as far as I can tell, it's for a bunch of trivial type definitions like type defs for integers and a Boolean definition as an enum and a time type with the same layout as the one in OpenZFS, which is I think 264-bit integers or something like that. So it looks like it's really nobody bothered to finish the job because it works when you have the OpenZFS kernel sources around and know how to tie them into your build process. And FreeBSD base system commands like the ectl, the boot environment control command, do just that. And if you look at the makefile, yeah, someone worked around the problem instead of solving it.
Ah,
This is definitely not the first time it came up. There are other PRs. The ZFS Python module only builds because it's blessed by OpenZFS upstream to the degree that the internal libzfs.h header has comments reminding you to keep the Python code in sync whenever you extend the lists of macros and enums. So yeah, basically that's the one interface which is easy to use if you do it from Python. Anything directly compiling against libzfs core needs to either bring a custom implementation of that and have in its search path fake headers to include which are empty, or do just that so that it does not find the config ones, or you have to kind of do a bit of search beyond the header. None of that is something which is acceptable for what's supposed to be a stable API and ABI.
Rob, observations, thoughts,
Look, I don't know enough about
enlightenment.
this. I don't know enough about this specific case. I'm frantically clicking around, but I
No.
can't actually find the specific code, which is I want to see which calls it's making, but it doesn't matter. If yeah, I found there's links in there to the port for it, but not the actual code. And yeah, whatever. It doesn't matter right
No
this
worries.
second.
Okay.
The but I would mostly say, and without knowing what FreeBSD is shipping exactly, it's like if some third party project needs a stable interface, they should just turn up and ask. Most of as best I understand, like there's not really any opposition to doing things that people want to do. Most of the time, things only come up. We only do things because um we know they exist and someone asks. So it's like if this is a useful piece of software that people would like, and there is and a blocker to its shipping is that there isn't a stable interface for something, or they don't know if it's stable or whatever, they come and say, "Hey, what's the best way to do this?" And and some people will go, bad idea, and some people will go, yeah, I don't know, and some people will pop up and go, oh, actually, maybe we do it this way, this way. I mean, there is libzfs core, which is like has a strong stability guarantee. There's only a few functions in it.
Yeah.
But if we needed to ship a stub header that is like, this is a header which will allow you to link properly against these libraries without having to do a build. I don't know. I have no idea. But it's all just programming. There's no technical reason any of it can't be done. But no one's going to do things they don't know exist. Which like I didn't know this. Not that I know most things. I didn't know this exists, and I've never heard anyone mention it before. So
I suspect that 20 type defs for simple types and providing fake empty files for the includes to include in the search path to just make it work. So the stable ABI exists. The headers to target the API are not completely installed. It's really just we're missing the headers.
Yeah.
They're
And
not
it could
there.
and it could be that actually like I don't know enough about it. It could be that it is all there, but they've never been imported into FreeBSD. I'll say properly
Oh,
in
that
inverted commas. But again, maybe because no one's needed them or understood that they might be useful or whatever. Like, it's all just elbow grease.
yeah.
We we can do anything.
And while talking about BECTL, another nasty thing about BECTL is because it makes direct use of both libzfs core and the real libzfs,
Mhm.
uh, it for whoever wrote the code when porting it from the shell prototype to C forgot to actually record the operations to the normal user ZFS history. You have to use the low-level history information to find out what happens. So if you do something
Oh
like
yeah,
bectl create and run
yeah,
zpool history afterward, it will look like nothing has happened.
yeah. And that's just
Which,
because the caller is expected to call the
yeah, exactly.
make a note in the history, and they never did. And that's like,
Mhm.
I mean that's in all honesty, that is probably half a day to add that support. Um, if it's any kind of sanely factored code, I know that code is you know well maintained, so it's probably all right. Then just going in there and sprinkling a few, yeah, and log this would is probably not that big a deal. It's just got to be someone with the time or the interest to do it. So I mean, if you, I shouldn't encourage you lot to snipe me on stuff, but honestly, if you um if you ask me kindly often enough, and uh, I'll end up going, fine, I'll have a look,
Poke, poke.
and
Do you have a
it'll be a
PayPal
great,
account? Do you have a
and
tip
it'll be a
jar? Do
great
you
day.
have a
Oh
coffee
yeah,
fund? I don't know.
yes, I have all of those things.
Oh, really?
Um,
Well, don't be shy. Don't be shy.
they are, you can go to my webpage or any of my social links. They are all linked through there. Sorry, I'm also not very good at uh advertising myself like that. So now I just feel weird.
We don't want competition, so we have you. So, yeah, I've definitely seen the ZPL history issues where, oh, I did an operation that really, really should be there, and
Yeah.
now it's much more clear that those are, questions of the API being supported, etc. I know you're only here a few more minutes. We are blessed with Ed Mast, it appears, and I'm curious, Ed, you've been following these issues where, say, hey, BECTL it dances around this, and other tools all dance around this, and we welcome your thoughts if you're available to chat. Mic isn't working. Fair enough. Okay, well, we're watching comments. I've dropped the link to the session video recording on this. So if you want, say, 40-ish minutes on discussing the possible guarantees and what can be done with it. And I believe, Andrew, were you an advocate of a stable API? Because that would perhaps be a breakthrough for automation of all things ZFS.
I am always an advocate for a stable API.
There you go. Uh,
I will just say on
yes.
stable, I am like they are important, but it's also it's work to produce and work to maintain. So
Mhm.
it's not to say we shouldn't do it, but it's not going to happen if there's a bunch of people who are like, yeah, that would be a cool thing to have, or I would build something if we had one. Um, and then nothing happens. It's like it's not a worthwhile use of time. But if there is like, if there is a real project here and or a couple of projects, and people turn up and say, I want my thing to work forever. I'm worried about stable API. Let's work together on that. Way more likely to happen. Way more likely. And I don't mean that to sound like callous. It's just like um, I want to do work that's useful, not work that no one wants. So um
To
Amen. Do
to
check
be
out the
clear,
session if you have a few minutes, but go ahead. Yeah,
acknowledged
Andrew.
I've always acknowledged that this is work and it is not free.
my my apologies. I did not mean to imply
No, no, I get it.
besmirch anyone in this call or anyone anywhere else. I just wanted to make it clear. Yeah.
So, in service
It would be
of
lovely
a
to do.
multi-month, if not year discussion of what people want, key point want, and will support, etc., do check out that video link. That was a thoughtful discussion, bringing some great minds together. And thank you. I'll keep saying that. Thank you. Thank you. Other thoughts on stable APIs at this time? Because I think we've got a user question from Steve. Going once, going twice. Steve, you ready to enlighten us?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir. And welcome, Alexander and Ed and others. This is great turnout. Go ahead. What's getting you?
Okay. I have a two-part question. I'll try to explain what I'm doing. I currently have a set of snapshots that happen, and they're probably like every 15 minutes, and they're retained for a period of time that's maybe 2-3 days. And what I'd like to do is something crazy, like do a snapshot every 5 minutes and retain for 45 days. And so I know that there are limits on how many snapshots you can have and then delete them in a reasonable time or with a certain performance load. So, but just putting that aside, my main concern has to do with, could I calculate the increase in space that would result from this? And so I've done some experiments where I'll do that 5-minute snapshot for 2 or 3 days. And at the end of that, I'll remove all the detail and leave the current state of things as it would normally have been. So I'm removing the increase. And so that gives me a pretty good idea of, hey, before you did the removes, it was this size, subtract this other size, and maybe it's an increase of 40 gig or something over that period of days. So I can sort of calculate it that way and project out. Now, on to my actual question. This is in support of a legacy application that sprinkles the data set with they're temporary files and they're very transient. So if I could omit them from the snapshot, which I cannot, like I can't easily sequester them into their own sub data set, child data set. I wish I could, but I can't. Is there a way for me to tell, okay, I've got 4 days of these very detailed snapshots. How much of that space is being used by those files? Because I'm trying to decide, do I need to go to more effort here, or should I just not worry about those transient files? And feel free to just point me in a direction. I don't need an actual solution.
I will say that it came up that the space accounting can be quite challenging to represent what you think you want. When you have a number of different size snapshots, and then it's telling you, in theory, you free up this much space if you were to delete them, such that a snapshot has a size, but it might not mean what you want.
Right.
Is your transient data intermixed with data you want to preserve, and that's part of the challenge?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And there's a certain cost to the effort of segregating it, which I can possibly do. But before I go to that work, which bears a lot of risk, I would want to have a feeling for, oh, you're really not gaining that much. And
Go ahead, Jan.
I have a first workaround idea that would be to take the snapshot so that you have an atomic snapshot to work off, and then walk the file system and create multiple data sets so that you split the files up. And basically you have then two or more lines of snapshots, ones with the big, ones with the small modifications, or the important or less important. So, and then you could have a third, which would symlink them together. And if you're careful about updating those, you would maintain as small as possible diffs between these kind of split up views on your data. And then you could replicate that array. But yeah, it implies keeping at least 2 copies of that data, which may be better than tons of snapshots of changes you don't care to preserve, because your storage requirement is basically the number of change blocks plus the metadata required to track them. And it sounds like your application write behavior is quite bursty. So guessing the short-term growth could be hard, because you have to watch it long enough for the bursts to even out.
Okay, and I threw out there is infrastructure for redacted send to take a snapshot and avoid things perhaps in service of
Yeah,
GDPR or some craziness.
redacted.
But is there any way, are there any benefits on the same file system? I don't know if how that infrastructure works, but
Would would a
it does come to
redacted
mind.
send would a redacted send allow me to filter out just files? Like it doesn't have to be data set specific?
Thought that
Redacted
was the
send receive
goal, but
is
I've never
cursed
used
to
it.
use,
It's a
because you
I'll try to
intentionally
find an
create a
example.
kind of damaged data set by recording that these objects are intentionally missing. Don't flip out about it. And then, so basically, by default, they're not mountable. You have to use extra flags to mount what's there. And it can happen that, yeah, your reduction hit a bit more than you expected. The blocks are there, but you won't see them, as far as I
Mm.
can tell. So
Mm.
it's really painful to use, but in theory, it could probably do something like that. But it also implies a send receive or clone step, so you end up with more data sets there.
No.
So I don't think you can get the feature you're asking about without at least uh, duplicating your storage requirement on the source system for the affected data sets, unless you can make it work by thinning out a single linear stream of snapshots. If what you really need turns out is just trimming the snapshots by, I don't know, for example, removing those with no changes to an imported file, so that you could run something like ZFS diff, and then if the diff does not contain any of the files, those history you wanted to snapshot frequently,
Mm.
you could then delete the snapshot and thin it out at the source early.
Oh, that's an excellent idea.
I've done that to pull ISOs out of out of snapshots and basically recreate the snapshots, skipping certain files, just adding rsync excludes to copy them over, which may be somewhere in that you could work something out.
Mm. Well, I think I've got enough stuff here to think about stuff and experiment until next week. So
Okay.
I'm good.
Ping me for that script if you think what I just described is helpful. I worked out the steps to do it, and it's sort of a pseudo recreated history that, well, the things that haven't changed, but it's still a new snapshot with the old name to declare what's in there. So yeah, it's not perfect, but it was a similar workaround.
Okay, I'll take a
Other
look.
ideas for Steve?
Play with ZFS diff and filtering which snapshots to keep after you've taken them.
Cool. And Steve, I believe you helped with the subtitles on the Summit videos. Thank you for that.
Yeah, it's slow going. I'm averaging about one a week.
Oh, well,
So
hey, it's a journey.
Yep.
But yeah,
You
it's
have a year.
until next time. Yeah, exactly. You've got boom. And yeah, I think we all stumbled onto the whole notion of the fact that we've got all these videos out there and their technical topics, and the voice recognition contraptions of the world are not very good at, say, ZFS function names. They're not good at all. They don't even capitalize the first letter of the first word of a video. So having a human jump in and help out is very, very appreciated. And thank you, Andrew, for also taking on some of those. Okay. Thank you for that topic, because if you come up with answers on how to handle that better, great. Yes, Andrew.
Are there more than you done?
It sounds like yes, if Steve is getting yay far. Maybe you two can get in touch either through chat or, thank you, Rob, through chat or email. Just connect, and I will, if there's one that, actually, if there's one that you don't have, Andrew, Steve has access to
So,
extract it. So, yes, Steve.
oh, okay. Yeah, I'm happy to extract and send or whatever, if
I
that would
totally
help.
forgot that you have that access, and now they include that ability to just delegate the subtitle closed captioning
I
management.
just DM'd
So,
you my email.
cool. Thank you both.
And
Appreciate it. Yes.
just a side note to anyone who's listening about the annotations or whatever they're called. So
Closed
when I work
captions.
on one, closed captions, when I
Hmm.
work on one, I will actually publish one that says this is a work in progress at the very front, so that we don't step on each other. If if you need someone else to participate, you're not going to have to worry about stepping on
Cool.
any of my work in progress. And Andrew, I will reach out.
Sure.
Awesome. Appreciated. Reach out if you have questions. Hopefully occasionally it'll be finding a place you see that it consistently misinterprets some function name. You just go through it. Anyway, thank you, thank you, thank you. We have other topics on deck. I'll do it very briefly while we have Mark. We went in. Mark is a bug buster for FreeBSD, and I suddenly have some access to work on tickets, and within the trifecta of jails, zones, Beehive, and OpenZFS, there are definitely tickets, and they have special handling. And I've shared in the jails doc my observations after a few hours of it. I'm going through about a dozen tickets. And I welcome any and all participation from the public, such as, oh, I found a ticket that says, thank you, this is fixed, and can be closed, but it's still open because no one noticed that it says, thank you, this is fixed. So I'd love to crowdsource this. You are welcome to read what's on screen. I've put the link to that in the chat if you want to dig deeper. Specific to OpenZFS, well, very much so. The heavy lifting is upstream in the OpenZFS project. In FreeBSD, you have the challenge of, say, FreeNAS, TrueNAS, NAS for free, etc., where a project might have a bug that is not, in fact, a FreeBSD bug. And you also have the challenge that there are a lot of tickets that say, hey, on this FreeBSD 8 system, pre-OpenZFS, I'm having this issue. Well, that's probably out of date, and I'm sure there have been issues that have come and gone during the time that the user bumped into that one. So I've closed some based on that, but I've been very conservative on what I've closed. But dear public, any help is appreciated on that. And also, the better your report, and Mark and I are having a sort of parallel discussion on good bug reporting and, what can be provided in ticket, and gee, should any given bug thing pop up with a click through set of guidance on, hey, here's what a good report looks like, because as Rob wonderfully highlighted, developers' time is, let's just say, precious and limited and needs to be focused, and they're also wetware, and I'd say developers get very discouraged if they are, say, chasing wild geese, etc. So any comments at this time on OpenZFS related bug busting on any platform, or shall we move on to what could be a description of channel program debugging? And Mark, was that in any way representative? Along with Ed Mast,
Sounds
who
right.
has a non-trivial interest in FreeBSD's hygiene from a bug reporting perspective.
Sounds like a good summary to me.
Okay, cool. So yeah, that conversation is hot and active, and everyone benefits from a nice, consistent set of bug tracking hygiene improvements. So, anything else before we jump into some brief notes, Jan, if you're ready, on channel program debugging? We've got a great turnout. We've got Alexander. We've got Stu and Greg, who rolled in after we mapped out the agenda. It's your call, not mine. Okay, Jan, do you want to tell us what you've learned about channel program debugging?
Yeah, so I'm in the process of cleaning up my first non-trivial channel program, and yeah, in the process I learned a bit about Lua and the surrounding tooling, because it turns out it's mostly Lua 5.2, so things like language servers for Vim work, and then you can have type annotations and make less errors. Who would have thought? And yeah, so I can just give you a quick overview of what can be done if you want to push it to the limits. But yeah,
Do you want to share your screen or just describe it?
uh, probably only makes sense when I share the screen.
Okay. Then so you can use your, what was it? Syntax checker. Is that accurate?
Not just that, yes.
Okay, cool. So I will stop sharing, let her rip. Let's learn something about this. Boom.
Can you see my screen? Can you
Yes,
read
sir.
the resolution?
Works for me, but I'm on a pretty big display. Others? Okay, let her rip.
So it's not completely finished, but the goal of this general program is to be invoked something like this. And that's to be expected right now. So basically, I want to tell the channel program the name of the pool, the name of the script, the parent data set, which is supposed to contain all the jails, and then the remaining arguments are a clone or a jail name and the relative path inside the jail file system. Sorry, and then the origin jail, and again the relative path inside of it, and then the snapshot on that. And that gets converted into, if we have something like this then gets converted into an appropriate ugly named data set, so that I have to scan this data set for the mount points and then infer the names of the jails from the mount points and store that, and do the same for inside the jails, because I'm flattening for reasons. I can go into the jail data sets into a not suitable for human consumption set of UUIDs, because if I don't, replication will break as soon as I reuse a dataset name. To have a look at what goes on here, first I made it a bit verbose, implemented a minimal object system in Lua, and now I can sprinkle a bunch of annotations for the language server in here so that it can catch my newbie mistakes better. Next, I go in here and define a bunch of hyperfunction, hide the variables inside of the block so that I get a lexical capture, but otherwise are inaccessible for accidental overwriting. And now I have here the wrapper function to have an object-oriented view on the channel program API, which also takes care of caching the results so that I don't repeatedly walk over the data sets if I have the same origin data set multiple times or the same jail multiple times. Because as I just said, with the UUID-based naming, I have to do a linear scan of all jails once and then one of the data sets per each jail for which I have a specified clone. And I don't want to do that per actual clone specification, but only once per all jails, and then inside each jail once per jail and not every time a jail is referenced. So at least that I can amortize that. And so on, then a bunch of helper code. And in the end, I should have something which looks a lot like this. So that I can say, for example, nice little things like in main, this is my argument list, take the first argument out of the argument list and require it to be a string. Then, okay, downcast that. Next, I say, okay, I want, now that I have the parent data set open, or this channel program has failed with an error, I can loop over the remaining ones, pass the basically this jail name slash relative path should be a clone of this origin, which is then specified as source jail slash relative path at snapshot name. And right now it should just return that, but there's a little bug here, which is to be expected. And I know where it is. And yeah, the interesting part is that you can have nice things here because if we look into the ZFS program man page, which documents all the ZFS specific functions we have, there is this really neat little thing, zfs.debug, which allows you to write to the kernel debug message stream coming out of ZFS, and you can read it with dtrace of all things, of course. And then if you don't have a very aggressive replication script running, there is not much noise here. So you can start it like this. And if I now do something like this, so let's try. And that's still there, okay. We get all that.
Hmm.
Okay, I've already killed that.
Is FSCADM your tool?
No, it's from a package.
Okay.
So now I start the jail again. And while it's running, we can have a look here. And we see what's going on here by just looking at all of those commands. And inside this stream, you can have your own custom trace messages pop up. The next thing I found is that it's quite useful to implement a toString method on your types so that you can just dump them out. And it's also possible if you have an error to just fail hard and early, and you get the channel program runtime working for you. So it will catch the errors. They're always fatal. So you can be sure nothing but the top level run the channel program will catch the error. So it will fail the channel program here and there, and you can have it present you the fatal error message. So yeah, it's not unlike pushing code on a modern microcontroller or something like that. It's restrictive, but it's also not the worst runtime to develop for. Yeah.
Any questions for
And Lua is a
Jan?
strange
Yes.
language, but
Lua is a strange language. Okay.
I have a comment. So I started looking into channel programs, and maybe I wasn't looking hard enough, but it seems to be not well documented, a little bit difficult to get started, and
yeah, it is.
I actually came back to these videos in order to get moving on it, and this was actually really helpful. I don't know how much of this you could share, Jan, but I feel
I can
like
share the experiment with you. There's nothing secret in here. So the first thing, which is a bit strange, is the way the ZFS program command will pass the argument list in, because you get an array with the first element being a table, which then contains under the key argv the real argument list. And all of that is passed in as a var arg argument. I assume because that's easier to make work. So you have to kind of do a bit something like this, which is a bit unusual as a syntax. And I prefer to just unpack this useless, to me at least, wrapper, and then have a main function which either takes a table, knowing that the table is an array and not a dictionary, or takes variable number of arguments as a var arg function, which also works. And for example, this one here is for provisioning the fig jails. And what I found out is that it's great to inspect the pool state, and all your snapshots and what the like, if they're there, but there are a bunch of changes you cannot do from inside a channel program. But you can work around those limitations, at least for my use case, by using the channel program to inspect the pool state, decide what has to change, and then return that to the caller. And then the caller can be something like this shell script here, which will run the ZFS channel program from a here doc, so that it can, in the end, be a single shell script. I only wrote a here doc to cat in the Lua script so that it's easier to edit, because once it's in the here doc, I don't get syntax highlighting and the like. And in this case, I pass all of that in and check if the here doc was in error. If not, I consume the output line by line from the channel program. And basically, the channel program returns an array of strings where each string is one line with fields separated by tabs so that it's easy to split up. And because the shell script itself runs as root and contains the Lua script is trusted, so there's no problem with just doing this thing you should normally never do in a shell script, which means read input and then execute input as a function call. But because it's the output from a trusted script running the kernel, I've considered that acceptable. And when I do it like that, it's quite easy because I can just define the required shell functions for either just logging or for implementing the change I want to happen on the pool. In this case, the function is mount point create, which creates a mount point inside the jail. And it assigns a new UUID to the dataset it has to create. If the UUID gen command failed and so on, handle that error by failing. And then call a wrapper function to create a CFS dataset with the understanding that this wrapper is in charge of making the output pretty and handling it if the state is already there. And then I take a snapshot of the newly created dataset and consider myself successful in that. So here I have to handle an annoying corner case in this case that it is possible that I have created the dataset and power failed between dataset creation and the at empty snapshot. And if I set any properties on the dataset, the written bytes counter on the dataset is non-zero, so I can't use that. So in that case, I have to just run find and on the mounted file system, mounted temporarily read only. If I find anything inside that file system, which is not just an empty directory, I consider that a fatal error, and otherwise I fix up the dataset by creating the at empty snapshot. Yeah, so you have to think a bit out of the box by injecting a Lua script into the ZFS kernel module and then taking back as output from that Lua script the commands for the shell. And thereby you can run things you can normally not do from inside of it. And for what I have in mind, this is good enough because I don't need it to be completely atomic. I just need to take in an atomic state and while holding a lock so that I know that as long as nobody violates my locking protocol, everything is fine.
Jan, what about clones?
That's the other one. The first one, this one handles the, so
And you had to
this
shell
is
out,
part of,
correct? Because channel programs, as I recall, didn't handle them.
no, you can't create a clone from inside the, so if you take a look at
Yeah,
the
that's the point.
man ZFS program, this lists all the ZFS specific functions you can call, which are all in the ZFS table. So here you have a table of functions you can call. And it turns out that, yeah, you can only create snapshots. You can do a bunch of other things as long as file systems aren't mounted. So you, for example, can't roll back a mounted file system. It has to be unmounted to be rolled back from at least from inside a channel program.
Now,
Which
now wasn't there some discussion about maybe somebody possibly adding clone to that at some point? Because I think during the uh, summit we had, I think somebody said the only reason it wasn't there is just because probably nobody thought about it.
I asked, and that was what Alan Jude replied from the top of his head because he just said, I assume it's not hard to it. He's a bit more familiar with the code than I am, of course. So he is probably in a position to guesstimate how hard it would be to implement. But right now it's not exposed as a function you can call. And short of a kernel exploit to run other functions, that's all you can do. So yeah.
Cool.
But I found that that's not a big limitation for what I have in mind because I have to do other things as well, like open a log file, record changes. So that case, it works out for me that I can just have a channel program compute what has to change and then send that out because most of the time the channel program should find that nothing has to be changed. So basically, it's the verification that the system state is in sync with the specified state, which I have to accelerate so that verifying that the system is in the state as specified is so fast that you can put it into the jail startup. So that something, so if I now take something like the jail I just destroyed and recreated, which takes about a minute, most of that spent decompressing the FreeBSD 14 base packages. But if I now stop that jail and do it again, it's half a second.
Yep.
And most of that is lost running the rc.d shell scripts because those are written quite inefficiently. And yes, I wrote a oversized modular jail conf for all the decorated output. That's not pure sane jail.conf. That's a bit out of the box.
Cool.
Oh, sorry, the question was by Steve, so I just saw the chat now.
You have been nudging him. What was
Find a
his original
snapshot
use
having a
case?
certain user-defined tag value. So you would have to use the ZFS get prop with a user property to do that. And which kind of works out because the only properties you can modify from inside a general program are user properties because any other property could have a non-trivial consequence when writing to it. So you can do things like take a data set, call the zfs.list.snapshots function on it, which returns a Lua iterator over all the snapshots of that data set. And what's quite nice is that you can also have things which are normally not so easy to obtain like that, because if you take a look at that in the main page, zfs.list, we have list the clones derived from a dataset, list the snapshots of a dataset, list the child dataset, so on a volume or a file system, list the bookmarks, then list the holds, okay, the properties which have a set value, the user properties and the system properties, yeah. And the exposed functions are quite strict. So for example, if you ask for the children of a non-existent data set, that's a fatal error. So you have to use zfs.exists first to check if the data set exists and only list its children when the data set exists, which kind of makes sense. You don't want to make it easy to misuse. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that does help.
Yeah, the
It's been
big
a month
advantage
or
of
so ago.
doing it in a channel program is that for a lot of things, otherwise you have to run the ZFS list or get command
Right.
dozens of times.
Yes. Very often.
And while it's not the most bloated command you will invoke from the command line, it's also not free because it's dynamically linked. It pulls in a bunch of libraries, it then does several user space, kernel space, and back context switches. With a channel program, you have the overhead of sending a script and converting it to bytecode and running the bytecode runtime. But you only do the round trip once to start it and then to get the result, basically. So you can effectively batch all of that querying into one context switch in and out.
Nice.
which really makes especially querying this data a lot cheaper. And the other advantage is that you get a consistent state because you can, when invoking the ZFS program command, decide if you want, okay, the traditional or JSON output in newer versions. But more important, you can pick if you want to be in a write or in a read transaction. And that means that the write transaction has quite a cost on a busy system because it's basically at the end of a transaction group. But you can do dozens of modifications in one transaction instead of one transaction per ZFS set. So it's probably still worth it. But if you run it with -n, it runs in a read-only transaction, which is a lot faster because you can run multiple of those and you don't have to close the transaction for it. But you still get a consistent view on the system state while the script is running. Whereas if you run dozens and dozens of ZFS commands, and you may run multiple of those instances of that shell or Python or whatever script concurrently, then they can observe each other as they modify the system. So if you do basically set arithmetic or relational algebra on them, it can just happen that your invariants get violated while they're running because someone was just getting impatient or whatever and decided to create or delete or modify a data set in a way which matters to your shell script, Python script, or pick your poison. Whereas with the Lua code running inside a read or write transaction, it gets a consistent view. To protect the kernel from denial of service attacks, you're limited in the number of Lua instructions you can run and in the amount of memory you can allocate, but you can override that within reason.
Well, thank you,
If you
Jan.
need
That
more
might be the
than
world's
100
first
megabytes
debugging
or
tutorial for
100
this. Continue.
million instructions at the same time, okay, then you are probably doing something you shouldn't be. This is designed for system administration, not Bitcoin mining.
Wow. Other questions for Jan and other insights, Jan. And again,
Thanks, Jan.
yeah, this is perhaps the world's first tutorial on debugging Lua in channel programs.
I found it quite pleasant to use with just fatal errors for things you're not sure about because it doesn't cost you much to just try it again and again.
Hmm.
It doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be harmless. And from inside a read transaction, you can't modify the state. At worst, you're producing wrong output, so give it a try. And yeah, the other thing is with ZFS.debug, you can record quite the verbose traces, filter the output format, or configure the dtrace invocation a bit more to only record exactly what you want. And you can get a easy to read trace of what your script did if you sprinkle lots of ZFS.debug calls around your code. It's not a proper single step capable debugger able to inspect the Lua runtime state, and you can't implement your own because you don't have an interactive data channel, and the debug module is intentionally hidden from you because you could do quite horrific things with the functions normally available through the debug interface, like have some code look into a coroutine and change its local variables around, which is exactly what a debugger should do, but it means that lexical scope is no longer really the lifetime of things. Yeah, it works, and but it's a bit, underdocumented describes it quite well.
Anything else on that topic? Thank you, Jan. That was awesome. I'm not saying goodbye, but I am saying thank you. And I believe we got a t-shirt idea out of it. That's 2 this week. Good work. Those are tracked on the hackathon doc. So, anything else, or have we covered some awesome territory and we will call it good? And I see a chat item. Who's got that? Boom. Scrolling. Ha. Yes. So, anything else, everyone? Thanks for the great turnout. Alexander, anything? You've been quiet. Greg, you've been quiet. Ed claims his microphone is having trouble. Thank you so much for tips on bug busting. Great questions, Steve. Going once, going twice. This is your call, not mine. Well, who wants the honors?
Wait a second. Greg has been muted.
Greg, did you have something? Oh, you're good. Swap issues came. Oh yeah, your swap issues from last time haven't come back since rebooting. Do watch that. Do watch your arc naturally, but it was a surprise situation where some application gobbled up a lot of memory and maybe it was a one-off surprise. Awesome. Let's see who wants the honors. Maybe Andrew. I think Jan took it last time. I could be wrong. Or even Steve.
I guess like and subscribe.
Very much. Have a great week, everyone. And thank you for the
Thanks.
great feedback. Take care.
See you.